Hey everybody, welcome to On Hand Art. My name is Brett. It is great to see you. Now, I was recently inspired by an artist who incorporates crushed glass into her paintings, but I don't consider myself that much of a painter, and so this work is going to be very different from what I normally do. But I do have an image in mind that will allow me to experiment with different sizes of crushed glass while incorporating some characters that I've had floating around my head for a few months. So follow along and see if you can use these ideas for your own amazing art. Before I start on the glass and painting, I want to get the foundational stuff out of the way. That includes the sketch for a copper wire frame I'll solder together in a few seconds. Now, the template will also help me size for the canvas and decide on a location. With my template cut out and ready, I'm gently bending this 18 gauge copper wire into shape. Each side is meant to only be mostly symmetrical. Mostly because I'm putting care into this piece, but I don't want it to look machine made, hence mostly symmetrical. So I'm soldering the pieces as I go using electronic solder. The difference between electronics and silver solder is that electronic solder normally has a resin flux in it, and it's a lead tin alloy, so it melts at a lower temperature and it holds the metal much better. You just won't use it for things that people eat or drink from. With the first side finished, I'm following that for the second side, working in some variations as I go. With the frame soldered together and flattened, I'm ready to carefully crunch the glass. The glass is from a frame that fell and shattered, and I'll tell you about that story one day, but in the meantime, I wrapped some of the glass in a few layers of this plastic bag, and I'm just hitting it with a hammer. Now, when smashing glass, make sure to have gloves and safety goggles on, not just safety glasses. You don't need chips of glass in your eye. Well, look, I don't, and I don't want to tell you what to put in your eyes, but I recommend safety goggles. With my glass crunched down, I'll put that aside for now and add a background to my canvas. I'm using a reclaimed canvas and tracing the butterfly out so I can center the painted pattern behind where it will go. Now, as I said in the intro, this is a very different piece than I normally create. It is much more emotionally charged and deals with a topic that I know most men don't like to talk about. And that is that sometimes you need to be reminded that you're not alone and people do want to help. And I want to make sure that that message is very clear without coming across as trite. So I've gone up and down in how I feel about this piece as I've worked on it. And after I was finished, I shared it with a bunch of people that I trust to tell me the truth about what they think of it. But if you're feeling alone, I can assure you that you're not alone. You're not the only one going through what you're going through, and you're not the only one feeling the way you feel. Alright, without a good transition from that heaviness and with the background in place, I'm adding back the pencil line where the butterfly will go so I know where its background border is. You'll see what I mean by that in a few seconds. Then I attach the wire frame of the butterfly with some thinner wire, just twisting it down tight to the canvas. And then between the wire ties and eventual paint, it shouldn't ever move. Now, the cool thing is that you can add the glass directly to the paint, or you could use a clear gloss or matte medium. It really just depends on the look you're going for. Now, in this case, I'm adding a black edge to the wings and the smallest pieces of glass and some glass dust. And then you'll want to gently press it in place and let it dry completely before working next to it. That's just because if you don't wait, the slightest touch of a brush might pull the glass off, and it just generally makes a minor mess for you. Once those are dry, I came back in with the background color for the rest of the wings. I'm selecting glass pieces that are large enough to kind of fill out the wings, but still small enough to act like little panels or tiles to catch the light. I also added a little glass dust between those pieces to fill in the spaces. And then I just did all this by hand as much as possible. If you're careful and handle the pieces by the flat areas, or just even use very light pressure on the edges, you're not bound to cut yourself. Just remember to press them in place once they're all in position, or they might eventually fall off. And I'm leaving areas without glass, which will be the holes in the wings. And like these holes in the wings, we all have these kind of wounds that we carry around with us. As time passes, we can forget or move on from those pain points, but they're always there. And on a technical note, again, great transition, I used a darker shade because I want to emphasize that it's a hole and not just a blank space. There's still kind of a thin membrane, I guess, if you will, of what was once there. And speaking of not being alone, that's where these people come in. I started with a sketch on paper, then took a photo of that and then traced it in Inkscape.
From there, I created 3 more characters so that they all look like they're part of the same community. The only trick is to get them from digital back onto the canvas without carbon paper, which I don't have any of. So first I cut them out and positioned them on the canvas, and then I put a heavy coat of pencil on the back of each, repositioned them, and then traced over them. That left a very faint line, and that was enough for me to paint them in. I also added a few background characters to fill in the crowd. Now, I did go back and forth on adding those background people because they really weren't part of my initial vision. But looking at the real world piece, I think they were needed. Let me know what you think in the comments. Now, I'm not going to remove them or anything, but I am curious what you think. The background people started with an underpainting of lighter gray. That will give them some varied color as I add the first overpaint of darker gray. And then later I added a guy on the side without the underpainting, and you can see the difference between the two. Now he's just flatter and recedes more into the background, and that's the look I was going for him. The final overpaint though will fuzz all of their edges to help them recede even more. For the 4 main characters, I started with an underpainting that will deepen their final colors. So there will be a maroon, green, purple, and dark maroon person. Maroon gets a purple underpaint, green gets a brown underpaint, and purple gets a maroon underpaint. And then this way I can paint in thin layers and let the paint mix how it wants. I actually am letting each layer dry between though. This is also not my favorite size to paint. Not only is it hard on my hands, it requires a lot of control. Now to get that control, I'm breaking with my standard practice and holding the brush more like a pen. Normally, I would hold the brush closer to the top of the handle, but that would be for a larger area. And while I get their little hands and feet painted in, I'm still thinking about what I want to do about their faces. Eventually, I went with glass dust over gold paint, which I found out later I didn't record me doing that, but I'll show you an example of that process in a few moments. There's not a specific message in this look, as much as removing the idea of something specific and leaving it more to you, the viewer's imagination, to fill in. With my people done, I'm working on how I want to show them filling in those holes in the butterfly's wings. My original idea was to show glass shards moving up a line, but now that I'm seeing it, I really don't like it. And that's where playing around with the shapes comes in, but I'm going to skip to the part where I found a star shape that makes more sense to me. The trick was getting the right size pieces, which meant carefully sifting through my tray of shards. Once I got those, I dropped some gold paint in an X pattern behind them and then pressed them in place. And then I filled the center with some glass dust. And then with all my stars in place, I could move on to the simpler stars for the background people. And those were just drops of gold paint with some glass dust pressed on top. And that's actually how I made their faces earlier. That then gave me the idea to add more glass to the rest of the scene, which I think was the missing piece of the story. To do that, I used a gloss gel medium to add the rest of the glass, and then when that's dry, I can show you the finished piece. This piece was as much about pushing my boundaries of working with materials I'm not confident in, as it was about sharing emotions I don't normally share publicly. And if you enjoyed this video and would like more art and ideas, feel free to hit the like button and subscribe. I'd love to have you as part of the on-hand art community. And if you did like this video, I'll leave a link to one that YouTube thinks you'll also like. But thanks for watching, and remember, you are creative.